"Your son is lying again, Mr. Hale," the teacher said, loud enough for the entire classroom to hear. "Strange men watching the school? That's not a story, that's attention-seeking." A few children snickered. Chairs scraped softly against the classroom floor as heads turned toward the boy standing beside the teacher's desk. His shoulders were stiff, hands clenched at his sides, eyes fixed somewhere near the faded alphabet chart on the wall. He insisted it happened right by the playground fence. The teacher continued, her voice sharp with irritation. 2 men in a van watching the school. Honestly, this kind of imagination is disruptive. The quiet maintenance worker standing in the doorway didn't argue. He simply watched the clock above the whiteboard tick forward, second by slow second. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout. Sometimes it walks through the door with a badge. And this story isn't really about a boy being called a liar. It's about what happens when power decides who gets believed. Before I show you the exact moment federal agents stepped through those school doors looking for the boy everyone mocked. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The room still smelled faintly of dry erase markers and pencil shavings when Marcus Hale finally stepped forward from the hallway. "Liam," he said quietly. The boy looked up, relief flickering across his face. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't challenge the teacher in front of her students. The calm in his expression felt almost out of place against the tension buzzing through the classroom. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he told her. "I was fixing the light outside the hallway. Heard my son's name." Elaine Whitford crossed her arms. "Well, perhaps you can explain to him that stories about suspicious men watching the school aren't appropriate." Liam shifted his weight nervously. "Dad, I wasn't." Marcus held up a hand, gentle but firm. "I know." 3 small words. That was all. But something in his voice steadied the boy immediately. Whitford frowned. "You know?" The maintenance worker glanced briefly out the classroom window toward the playground beyond the chain-link fence. Children ran across the grass under the gray afternoon sky. The wind rattled the metal swing set with a hollow clank. Then he looked back at her. "Liam doesn't make things up," he said simply. Several students leaned forward in their chairs, sensing the quiet tension growing between adult authority and the man in work boots standing beside the door. Whitford sighed. "Mr. Hale, children exaggerate. It's normal. But when it spreads fear around school property, we have to address it." Marcus nodded slowly. Of course, he crouched beside his son. "Tell me again what you saw." The teacher looked ready to protest, but something in the father's calm focus made her hesitate. Liam swallowed. "There was a white van parked near the fence," he said softly. "Not by the parking lot. Closer to the old equipment shed." Marcus listened carefully. "Windows? Tinted? Did the engine run?" The boy blinked, surprised. I think so. I heard a sound. And the men? One was sitting in the front. The other was standing outside the van." He kept looking toward the playground. Marcus didn't speak for several seconds. His mind moved through details automatically, patterns forming the way they always had. Vehicle placement. Observation point. Line of sight. Whitford finally cut in. "Mr. Hale, I understand wanting to support your child, but this is exactly the kind of fantasy I'm talking about." Marcus stood. His coveralls still smelled faintly of machine oil from the boiler room. A wrench hung from his back pocket. He looked every inch the school maintenance worker. But his eyes moved once more toward the window. Calculating. Measuring. Memories flickered through his thoughts like old files opening in a locked cabinet. He closed them again. Not here. Not yet. Whitford tapped a stack of papers on her desk impatiently. This school cannot operate on imaginary threats. Marcus turned back to her. No, he said calmly, it can't. For a moment, the classroom fell completely silent. Even the children sensed something shifting beneath the surface of the conversation. Whitford straightened, clearly irritated. I'll be speaking with the principal about this, she said. If Liam continues spreading stories, disciplinary action may be necessary. Liam's face went pale. Marcus placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. That won't be necessary. Oh? She said sharply. Marcus nodded toward the window again. Kids notice things adults miss sometimes. Whitford gave a tight smile. Yes, imagination, observation, Marcus corrected quietly. Outside, the wind rattled the playground fence again, metal clicking against metal. A faint mechanical hum drifted across the yard. Marcus heard it instantly. His head tilted slightly. Engine vibration. Low idle. Far too close to the equipment shed. His gaze lingered on the far corner of the schoolyard where the fence curved behind the storage building, the place Liam had described. The teacher followed his eyes and rolled hers. There's nothing there, Mr. Hale. He didn't answer. Instead, Marcus gave his son's shoulder a gentle squeeze. You did the right thing telling someone, he said softly. Liam nodded, still unsure. Whitford sighed again. Well, unless there's anything else. Footsteps echoed suddenly down the hallway outside. Heavy ones. Multiple. Not students, not teachers. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the classroom door just as the sound of a distant car door slamming carried faintly through the open window. Then came another. And another. Engines shutting down. Voices outside. Professional voices. Whitford frowned. What on earth? Marcus didn't move, but something deep in his chest tightened, because he recognized the rhythm of those footsteps and the authority behind them. A moment later, the classroom door opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped inside. Behind him stood two more agents, and the gold letters on the first man's badge caught the fluorescent light as he spoke. Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said calmly. We're looking for the student who reported suspicious activity near the playground fence. The classroom stayed frozen for a long moment after the words Federal Bureau of Investigation settled into the air. Even the children stopped whispering. The agent standing in the doorway scanned the room with calm precision, his gaze landing first on the teacher, then the students, then finally the quiet boy beside the maintenance worker. Which one of you is Liam Hale? He asked. Liam's fingers tightened around the edge of his desk. Marcus felt the tension immediately. He lowered his voice. It's okay. The boy raised his hand slowly. That's me, the agent nodded once. Good. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Elaine Whitford blinked in disbelief. Excuse me, questions? About what? The second agent stepped forward, showing his badge. Ma'am, this student reported suspicious activity near the school perimeter earlier today. Whitford's voice tightened. Yes, but that was clearly. She stopped mid-sentence, because the agents weren't smiling. They weren't humoring a misunderstanding. They were serious. The room shifted instantly. Students leaned toward one another, whispering. Liam looked up at his father, uncertainty in his eyes. Marcus squeezed his shoulder gently. You already told the truth, he murmured. Just do the same thing again. The lead agent crouched slightly so he was at eye level with the boy. Can you show us exactly where you saw the vehicle? Liam nodded nervously. Near the equipment shed. By the fence, Marcus noticed something immediately. The agent didn't look surprised. If anything, the man looked confirmed. Whitford stepped forward, her composure starting to crack. This is unnecessary, she said stiffly. The child misunderstood what he saw. The agent stood again, turning toward her. With respect, ma'am, we'll determine that. The firmness in his tone quieted the room again. Outside the window, the sound of additional vehicles pulling into the parking lot echoed faintly. More doors slamming, more footsteps. Marcus felt Liam glance up at him again. The boy whispered, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" He crouched beside him again. No. His voice was steady. "You noticed something important." Whitford folded her arms. "Mr. Hale, you're encouraging this." Marcus rose slowly. "I'm encouraging honesty." The teacher shook her head in disbelief. "This school cannot operate on every child's imagination." The agent glanced between them. "Ma'am, did you file any report about the student's observation?" Whitford hesitated. "Well, no." Because there was no reason to believe, the agent nodded once. Then he turned to Liam again. "Can you describe the van?" The boy swallowed. "White. Old. Kind of dirty. Windows?" "Dark. Did you see the license plate?" Liam shook his head. "No, but there was a sticker on the back window." "What kind of sticker?" "A red triangle." The agent exchanged a quick look with his partner. Marcus noticed it immediately. Recognition. Confirmation. The agents already knew something. Whitford saw the look too. Her confidence began slipping. "Well, children can be very imaginative," she insisted again, though her voice had softened. The lead agent straightened. "Children can also be very observant." The classroom door opened again. Principal Raymond Cardenas stepped inside, clearly confused by the sight of federal agents standing among his students. "What's happening here?" The agent turned politely. "Sir, we're investigating activity near the school grounds." Cardenas looked stunned. "Activity?" Marcus watched the principal's face carefully. Fear, confusion, concern about the school's reputation. Whitford stepped beside him quickly. "It's a misunderstanding. One of the students made up a story about suspicious men." "He didn't make it up," Liam whispered. Marcus felt the boy's voice tremble. The agent looked at him again. "You're sure about what you saw?" "Yes." The certainty in Liam's answer hung in the room like a weight. Whitford exhaled sharply. "Principal Cardenas, this is exactly the kind of disruption I warned you about." Marcus studied her quietly. Arrogance mixed with embarrassment now. She wanted control back. The principal rubbed his forehead. "Agents, perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office." The lead agent nodded. "That would be ideal." He turned back to Liam. "Would you be comfortable coming with us to explain what you saw?" The boy glanced at his father. Marcus gave a small nod. "You're fine." Liam stood slowly. Several classmates stared at him as he walked toward the door. The boy who'd been called a liar 5 minutes ago was now being escorted by federal agents. Whitford watched the scene unfold, her expression tight. Marcus followed them into the hallway. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The corridor smelled faintly of floor polish and cafeteria food drifting from down the hall. More agents were visible near the school entrance now. 2 stood beside a dark SUV parked near the curb. Whitford noticed them too. Her voice dropped. "This is ridiculous." The lead agent paused beside the principal's office door. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "with respect, we've been watching this area for 3 days." The hallway went quiet. Marcus felt Liam's small hand tighten around his sleeve. 3 days? The principal repeated. The agent nodded. "We're tracking individuals connected to a federal investigation." Whitford's face lost color. "But that's impossible." The agent's gaze moved briefly toward Marcus. Not recognition, just observation. "You'd be surprised what happens when people assume no one is paying attention." Liam whispered again. "Dad, I told them." Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I know." Before they stepped into the office, he glanced once more through the front doors toward the parking lot. The same white van sat near the far corner of the property. Engine off now. 2 agents approaching it carefully. Marcus felt something settle in his chest. The pattern was clearer now, much clearer. But the teacher still didn't see it, and the real reveal hadn't even begun yet. By the way, if you enjoy stories where truth finally stands up to power, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These stories remind us that quiet people often see what others ignore. Inside the principal's office, the door closed, and the questions were only beginning. The principal's office felt smaller once the doors shut. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the distant echo of students changing classes somewhere down the hall. Liam sat in the chair beside Marcus, his feet barely touching the floor. Across from them, Principal Raymond Cardenas wiped nervous sweat from his forehead, while the two FBI agents positioned themselves calmly near the desk. Agent Nadia Cortez had just arrived, stepping in quietly while the other agents finished securing the parking lot outside. Her dark jacket carried the same gold letters as the others, but her posture was different, steady, observant, measuring everything. She looked first at the boy. "You're Liam Hale?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said gently. "You're not in trouble. We just need to understand what you saw." The reassurance loosened the tight knot in his shoulders. Elaine Whitford stood stiffly near the bookshelf, arms folded like armor across her chest. "This is still unnecessary," she muttered. "Children misinterpret things all the time." Agent Cortez didn't look at her. Her focus stayed on Liam. "Start from the beginning," she said. "What time were you outside?" "Recess," Liam answered. "Where exactly were you standing?" "By the swing set." Cortez nodded slightly. "And then, I saw the van near the fence." By the equipment shed, Marcus noticed the way the agent's eyes sharpened at that. "Specific location." The boy continued, voice gaining a little confidence now. "One man stayed in the driver's seat. The other one got out." "What did he do?" "He kept looking toward the playground." Cortez glanced at one of the agents beside her. Another silent exchange. Whitford shifted impatiently. "This is ridiculous," she said again. "A parked vehicle isn't suspicious." Marcus remained silent. But his mind worked through the details like an old machine waking up. Observation point. Distance to playground. Line of sight to student gathering areas. The van had been positioned carefully. Too carefully. Cortez turned to Liam again. "Did the man talk to anyone?" "No." "Did he take pictures?" "I didn't see a camera." The agent nodded thoughtfully. "And what made you tell your teacher?" The boy hesitated. "Because it felt wrong." That simple answer filled the room with a quiet weight. Cardenas cleared his throat nervously. "Agent, surely this could be explained." Cortez finally looked up. "Possibly," Whitford exhaled loudly. "Exactly," but the agent's eyes were still studying Liam. "What color was the man's jacket?" she asked. "Gray, hat? No hat, hair, short, dark?" Marcus noticed the detail instantly. The boy remembered everything. Small observations, subtle features. The same kind of details investigators relied on. Whitford shook her head. "This is unbelievable." Cortez looked at her for the first time. "Why?" "Because children exaggerate sometimes." Whitford gestured toward Liam. "He probably saw a delivery driver or a parent waiting for someone." Marcus finally spoke. His voice remained calm. "Delivery trucks don't idle beside school fences during recess." The room went quiet. Whitford turned sharply toward him. "And you would know that how?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at his son. "You did the right thing telling someone." The boy nodded slightly. Agent Cortez studied Marcus now. Something about his tone had caught her attention. Professional calm, measured observation. She'd heard it before. From trained people. "Mr. Hale," she said slowly, "were you aware of the van before today?" "No, but your son told you about it." "Yes, and what did you do after that?" Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he answered honestly. "I checked the fence line during lunch break." Whitford scoffed. So now the maintenance worker is conducting security patrols? He ignored the comment. I saw tire tracks near the shed, he continued. The agents exchanged another glance. Cortez leaned forward slightly. Tire tracks, yes. Fresh? Within the last few hours, Cardenas blinked. You inspected the ground? Marcus shrugged slightly. I was already outside fixing a broken light. Cortez watched him more carefully now. Did you see the van yourself? Not directly, but... I heard it, Whitford laughed. You heard it? Marcus nodded. Low engine idle, he gestured lightly toward the parking lot. Older vehicle. Probably mid-2000s model, the room fell silent again. Because outside the window, visible just beyond the fence, a white van now sat surrounded by 2 FBI agents. Agent Cortez slowly turned her head toward the glass. Then back to Marcus. You recognize the engine sound? Yes, Whitford shook her head. This is absurd. But Cortez wasn't listening to her anymore. Her attention had shifted fully to Marcus Hale. She studied his face for a long moment. Something familiar lingered in her memory. Not the name. The composure. The way he processed information. The quiet precision. Marcus noticed the look but said nothing. Across the room, one of the other agents received a message through his radio. He stepped closer to Cortez and spoke quietly. We confirmed the vehicle description. She nodded once. Then looked back at Liam. You did good noticing that van. The boy glanced at his father again. Marcus gave him a small smile. Whitford, however, still refused to accept the shift happening around her. This still proves nothing, she insisted. Cortez stood slowly. Actually, she said calmly, it proves quite a lot. And outside the school building, more federal vehicles were arriving. The investigation was expanding. But what none of them realized yet was that the quiet maintenance worker sitting in that chair already understood exactly what kind of operation they were dealing with. And the moment the agents figured out who he really was, everything in that room was about to change. Agent Nadia Cortez didn't immediately explain what she meant. Instead, she stepped closer to the window of the principal's office, studying the scene outside with careful focus. The white van Liam described now sat boxed in by 2 federal vehicles. Agents moved slowly around it, methodical, controlled. Marcus noticed every movement, perimeter control, vehicle containment, standard procedure. Behind him, Liam shifted nervously in his chair. Dad, are those the men I saw? Marcus leaned slightly toward him. Not sure yet, he said quietly. Just let them do their work. Principal Cardenas paced behind his desk, running a hand through his thinning hair. This is unbelievable, he muttered. Federal agents outside my school, Elaine Whitford stood rigid near the bookshelf, still refusing to accept what was unfolding. This is still an overreaction, she insisted. A parked van doesn't justify an investigation. Cortez turned slowly from the window. Actually, it can. Her voice carried a calm authority that filled the office. Whitford frowned. On what basis? The agent walked toward the desk. For 3 days we've been tracking individuals connected to a federal fraud operation. Cardenas blinked. Fraud? Identity theft network. They've been moving between public areas to avoid fixed surveillance. Whitford crossed her arms again. That has nothing to do with the school. Cortez looked directly at her. Public places with predictable schedules are ideal observation points. The teacher opened her mouth, then closed it again. Marcus watched quietly. He could see the pattern forming now. Temporary observation sites. Vehicles rotating locations, watching routines. The kind of behavior that trained investigators recognized immediately. Liam looked between the adults, confused. I just thought they looked weird, he said softly. Cortez crouched slightly beside him again. And sometimes that's exactly how investigations start, Whitford sighed dramatically. So now we're praising paranoia? Marcus spoke before anyone else could respond. Observation isn't paranoia. The teacher turned sharply. Oh, really? He didn't raise his voice. Kids notice changes faster than adults. Whitford shook her head. This entire situation is spiraling because one child misinterpreted a parked vehicle. Cortez straightened. Except the vehicle matches one we've been monitoring. The words landed heavily. Cardenas stopped pacing. It does? The agent nodded. Same make, same color. Same sticker on the rear window. Whitford went still. Marcus saw the exact moment doubt flickered across her face. But pride held it back. That still doesn't mean this boy identified the correct vehicle, she said. Cortez didn't respond. Instead, she walked back toward the window again. Outside, one of the agents opened the van's rear door. Another agent spoke into a radio. Cortez listened carefully. Then nodded once. Marcus noticed something else. The way her attention drifted briefly toward him again. Still studying. Still measuring. Her instincts were working. Because something about the quiet maintenance worker in oil-stained coveralls didn't match the situation. Not the calm. Not the precise observations earlier. Not the way he'd immediately taken Liam's description seriously. Cardenas noticed the shift in conversation. He cleared his throat. Agent, should we be concerned about student safety? Cortez turned back. At this moment, no immediate threat. The principal exhaled in relief. But, she continued, we do need to understand exactly what the suspects were doing here. Whitford stepped forward again. Well, clearly they weren't doing anything related to the school. Marcus tilted his head slightly. You don't know that. Her eyes flashed. Mr. Hale, you're a maintenance worker, yes, so perhaps investigative conclusions should be left to professionals. The room went quiet. Marcus didn't react to the insult. But Liam did. The boy looked down at the floor, embarrassed again. Cortez noticed that too. She folded her arms thoughtfully. Actually, she said slowly, Mr. Hale has made several accurate observations already. Whitford blinked. What? The tire tracks he mentioned, Cortez continued. Our team confirmed those beside the equipment shed. Marcus remained silent. The teacher stared at him. You examined the ground? He shrugged slightly. I was already outside. Whitford scoffed. You're acting like some kind of investigator. Marcus glanced briefly toward the window again. Outside, the agents were now removing items from the van. Boxes. Electronic equipment. Whitford followed his gaze. That proves nothing. Cortez's radio crackled softly at her side. She listened for several seconds. Then her expression shifted. Subtle, but noticeable. Understood, she replied into the radio. Marcus watched her carefully. Something had changed. Cardenas noticed too. What is it? Cortez lowered the radio. Our team just confirmed something inside the van. Whitford crossed her arms again. And? The agent looked directly at Liam. They found surveillance equipment. The room went silent. Cardenas leaned heavily against his desk. Surveillance of the school? Possibly, Cortez said. Whitford shook her head. This is unbelievable. Marcus felt Liam's small hand tighten around his sleeve again. Dad. He placed his hand over the boy's. It's okay, but Cortez's attention had shifted back to Marcus once more. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Because the way he'd reacted to the news wasn't shock or confusion. It was recognition. The kind professionals had when a theory was confirmed. She stepped closer. Mr. Hale, he looked up. Yes? You seem very familiar with investigative patterns. Marcus didn't answer immediately. The office felt very quiet now. Outside, agents continued moving equipment from the van. Inside, the pieces of the puzzle were slowly sliding into place. Whitford still didn't see it. Cardenas didn't understand it. but Cortez was getting closer. And she had just begun to realize that the quiet maintenance worker defending his son was hiding far more than anyone in that room had imagined. The silence after Agent Cortez's question stretched long enough for everyone in the room to feel it. "You seem very familiar with investigative patterns." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down at Liam, whose small fingers were still gripping the sleeve of his work shirt. The boy's eyes carried the same quiet fear he'd shown earlier in the classroom. Marcus rested a reassuring hand over his. "It's all right," he murmured. Then he looked back at the agent. "I just pay attention." Whitford scoffed immediately. "Pay attention? That's a generous way of describing speculation." Cortez didn't react to the teacher's remark. Her eyes stayed on Marcus a moment longer, as if weighing something invisible. Outside the window, 2 agents continued unloading equipment from the van. A metal case clanked softly against the pavement as it was set down beside the vehicle. Cardenas moved closer to the glass. "Surveillance equipment," he repeated quietly. "Right next to the playground." The reality of that sentence seemed to settle into him slowly. Whitford still refused to surrender her certainty. This could still be unrelated, she insisted. Maybe they were watching traffic patterns. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Traffic patterns don't require directional microphones. Cortez's eyes flicked toward him again. "Exactly," she said. Whitford frowned. "Microphones?" The agent nodded toward the window. "That case our team just removed contains audio monitoring equipment." Cardenas turned pale. "You mean they were recording the school?" "We're still determining the purpose," Cortez replied calmly. Marcus watched the agents outside kneel beside the open van. One of them held up a small black camera mounted on a telescoping stand. Observation gear, portable, temporary setup, the kind used for mobile surveillance. Liam followed his father's gaze. "Dad, were they watching us?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Maybe not you specifically." Whitford rubbed her temples. This is becoming absurd, but even her voice had lost its earlier sharpness. Doubt was creeping in. Cortez turned back to Liam. "Can you show us exactly where you were standing when you saw them?" The boy nodded. Cardenas straightened nervously. "You want to go outside?" "Yes," Whitford immediately objected. Taking a student outside during an investigation is inappropriate. Cortez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, the investigation is already outside." That ended the argument. A moment later, the group stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while distant classroom chatter echoed faintly through the building. Liam walked beside Marcus, staying close. Cardenas hurried ahead, clearly anxious about the sight of federal vehicles parked in front of his school. Whitford followed stiffly, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. When they reached the front entrance, the doors opened automatically with a soft mechanical hum. Cool air rushed inside. And the sight outside finally silenced everyone. 4 FBI vehicles now lined the curb. Agents moved with quiet coordination around the white van. Equipment cases lay open on the pavement while technicians examined wires and recording devices. Parents walking past the school slowed to stare. Students pressed their faces to classroom windows. The quiet suburban campus had suddenly become a federal scene. Whitford stopped beside Marcus, staring in disbelief. "This is insane." Cortez gestured toward the playground. "Liam, can you walk us to where you saw the van earlier?" The boy nodded and started across the grass. Marcus walked beside him. The playground swings creaked softly in the wind as they passed. The equipment shed sat near the back fence, its metal siding dull and weathered. "Here," Liam said, pointing toward the gravel strip beside the fence. Cortez crouched down. The tire tracks Marcus had mentioned were still visible in the dirt. She ran her fingers lightly across the impressions. Recent, she said. Marcus nodded. Within a few hours. Whitford folded her arms again. You're both making assumptions, but Cortez was already studying the ground. Look at the positioning, Marcus said quietly. She glanced up at him. What about it? He pointed toward the playground, clear sight line to the swings, then toward the school building. And direct view of the main entrance. Cortez followed the angles with her eyes. He was right. Perfect observation points. She stood slowly. Interesting. Whitford shook her head. You're entertaining this? Marcus brushed dirt from his hands. Observation posts rely on visibility. Whitford laughed sarcastically. Oh, please. What's next, Mr. Hale? Tactical analysis? He didn't respond. But Cortez's attention sharpened again. Because the maintenance worker wasn't guessing. He was explaining. Behind them, one of the agents approached carrying a tablet. Agent Cortez, she turned. What did you find? The agent showed her the screen. Marcus saw the reflection in her eyes as she studied it. License plate data, vehicle registration. Then her expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. Cortez looked from the tablet back to Marcus. And for the first time since arriving at the school, recognition flickered across her face. Not complete recognition, but close. Whitford noticed the silence. Well? She demanded. Cortez lowered the tablet slowly. Our suspects rented this vehicle 2 days ago. Cardenas swallowed. For what purpose? We're still determining that. Marcus studied the equipment being cataloged near the van. He already knew the answer. But he wasn't ready to say it yet. Cortez was still watching him. The way someone studies a memory that's just out of reach. Finally, she spoke again. Mr. Hale. He looked up. Yes? You said you heard the engine earlier, that's right. How far away were you? Maintenance corridor near the cafeteria. She nodded slowly. Then asked a quieter question. Have we met before? Marcus paused. Just for a moment. The wind rattled the playground fence behind them. Agents moved around the van. Students watched from classroom windows. And somewhere deep in Agent Cortez's mind, a missing piece of the puzzle was finally starting to move. By the way, if stories like this remind you how quickly people underestimate quiet strength, make sure you're subscribed. The best reversals are still ahead. The wind rattled the chain-link fence again, the metallic sound carrying across the quiet playground. Agent Nadia Cortez's question lingered in the air between them. Have we met before? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her toward the white van surrounded by agents. One of them carefully removed a long black case from the back compartment while another photographed the interior. The operation outside was unfolding exactly the way federal containment usually did. Systematic, quiet, professional. Marcus had seen it many times before. He forced that thought down. Don't think so, he said calmly. Cortez watched him for a moment longer, clearly unconvinced but not ready to press further. Whitford, however, had regained some of her confidence. Well, now that we've confirmed there's some kind of investigation happening, she said, brushing dust from her blazer sleeve, perhaps we can acknowledge that this entire spectacle still started with a child's misunderstanding. Liam stiffened beside his father. Marcus felt it instantly. His hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder. Cortez turned toward the teacher slowly. You're certain about that? Whitford gestured toward the van. It's parked on school property. Anyone could have noticed it. Marcus spoke quietly. Not everyone did. The teacher rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Cardenas shifted uncomfortably beside the playground gate, glancing toward the growing crowd of curious parents gathering near the sidewalk. We should probably move everyone back inside, he muttered. But Cortez wasn't finished examining the area. She walked along the gravel strip beside the fence, studying the ground and the equipment shed nearby. Marcus noticed the angle she paused at. Direct view of the swing set, clear sightline to the school entrance, exactly where he had pointed earlier. Cortez crouched beside the fence again, examining the dirt carefully. "Tire pressure looks uneven," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Rear axle carrying more weight." Whitford turned sharply. "You two sound like mechanics now." Neither of them responded, because Marcus had already noticed something else, a small scuff mark in the gravel. He pointed toward it. Tripod leg. Cortez leaned closer. Sure enough, 3 shallow indentations formed a triangle in the dirt. Camera mount. Observation equipment. Whitford exhaled loudly. "This still doesn't prove anything about the school." Cortez stood slowly. "Actually, it suggests they were monitoring something very specific." The teacher crossed her arms again, like traffic patterns. Marcus shook his head. "No." Whitford glared at him. "And what makes you so certain?" He pointed toward the playground again. "Kids gather here at the same time every day," then toward the school doors. Same entrance. Same schedule. Cortez followed the logic silently. Predictable movement. Crowds. Routine. All useful observation targets. But she was still watching Marcus more than the scene itself now. Something about his reasoning felt too natural, too practiced. The other agent approached again with the tablet. Agent Cortez. She turned. "We just finished checking the surveillance equipment." "And?" 2 cameras. Directional microphone. Portable data storage. Whitford scoffed again. Still could be unrelated. But the agent continued. They were pointed toward the playground and the main school entrance. The teacher's voice faltered. "Oh," Cortez nodded once. "That's what we suspected." Marcus felt Liam grip his hand again. "Dad, why would someone watch the school?" He knelt slightly so the boy could hear him clearly. "Sometimes people watch places to understand patterns." "What kind of patterns?" Marcus hesitated. "People coming and going." Whitford shook her head. "This is becoming paranoid," but Cardenas was staring at the van again. "No," the principal murmured. "This is serious." A few more parents had stopped on the sidewalk now, whispering as they watched agents working around the vehicle. Cortez glanced at the growing crowd. "We should finish this quickly." She turned back to Liam. "You said the man stood outside the van." The boy nodded. "Right there," he pointed toward the exact spot where the tripod marks were visible. Cortez looked impressed. "That's very precise." Whitford opened her mouth again, but stopped when the agent added quietly, "Your student may have just placed our suspect exactly where we needed him." Marcus saw the teacher's pride crumble slightly. The narrative she'd built in the classroom was slipping away. But she still wasn't ready to admit it. "This still doesn't justify humiliating my classroom with federal agents," she said. Marcus stood again. "You humiliated my son first." The words weren't loud, but they landed harder than anything else that had been said. Whitford stared at him. Cardenas shifted awkwardly. Cortez watched both of them carefully, because something about Marcus's tone had changed. Not angry, just firm. The kind of controlled authority she recognized from trained professionals. Her eyes narrowed slightly again. "Mr. Hale," she said slowly. "Yes? You noticed tire pressure differences from a distance." Marcus shrugged. "Just an observation. And tripod marks in gravel." "Yes." "And engine vibration earlier." "Yes." Whitford threw up her hands. "Oh, wonderful. Now he's a detective." But Cortez ignored the comment, because she was almost certain now. Not about the investigation. About him. She stepped closer. "Before you worked maintenance here," she said carefully, "what did you do?" Marcus hesitated, just long enough for her suspicion to grow stronger. Behind them, the agents finished cataloging the surveillance equipment from the van. The investigation was already moving forward. But inside Cortez's mind, a different puzzle was forming. One that centered on the quiet man standing beside the boy. Because the more she listened to him, the more he sounded like someone who had once done exactly the job she did now. And she was getting very close to remembering where she'd seen that kind of calm before. Agent Cortez's question lingered in the cool air of the playground. "Before you worked maintenance here, what did you do?" Marcus didn't answer right away. The wind shifted across the open field, brushing through the metal chains of the swing set with a slow creaking sound. Liam looked up at his father, clearly sensing the tension growing between the adults. Marcus kept his gaze steady on the fence line. "Different jobs," he said simply. Whitford let out an exasperated breath. Of course, because that explains the forensic-level analysis of tire pressure. Marcus didn't respond to the jab. He had learned long ago that silence often said more than arguments. Cortez, however, didn't let the moment go. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him. "Different jobs," she repeated quietly. Then her radio crackled. She lifted it to her mouth. "Cortez." A male voice answered from the parking lot. "We just finished running the plates from the van." Marcus noticed the shift in her posture instantly. "What did you get?" she asked. "Vehicle's a rental. 2-day contract." Registered under a false identity, Whitford scoffed again, though the sound carried far less certainty than before. "Plenty of people use fake names for rentals." Cortez ignored her. "Any connection to our investigation?" The radio crackled again, still checking, but we did recover a partial data drive from the camera system. Marcus looked toward the van again. That was faster than he expected. The agents were efficient. The voice on the radio continued. "We're pulling the files now." Cortez lowered the radio slowly. Cardenas stepped forward anxiously. "What does that mean?" "It means we'll know what they were recording." Whitford crossed her arms again. "And when it turns out to be traffic footage, perhaps this entire scene can finally calm down." Marcus glanced toward the playground. Children from a nearby classroom were now watching through the windows, faces pressed against the glass. A federal investigation outside their school. The moment had already become something no one would forget. Liam tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Marcus knelt again. "No, but everyone keeps staring. That's because you did something brave." The boy frowned. "I just told the truth." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's usually the brave part." Cortez watched the exchange carefully. The father's calm, the boy's quiet confidence. Something about it tugged at a memory she still couldn't fully place. Whitford broke the silence again. "This is still an enormous overreaction," she insisted. "One van does not justify turning a school into a crime scene." Marcus stood again. "Sometimes one van is enough." Whitford turned sharply. "You keep speaking like you know exactly what's happening." He didn't answer. "But Cortez did." "He might." The teacher blinked. "What?" Cortez folded her arms thoughtfully. "Mr. Hale has noticed several details my team confirmed only after arriving." Whitford shook her head. "That's coincidence, maybe." Marcus shifted his weight slightly. The gravel beneath his boots crunched softly. He had already seen enough to understand the situation, but saying it aloud would open doors he'd kept closed for years. Doors he wasn't sure he wanted reopened. Behind them, one of the agents jogged across the grass from the van. He held a tablet in one hand. "Agent Cortez." She turned. "What did you find?" The agent handed her the tablet. "We accessed the data drive." Marcus watched her eyes scan the screen. Footage, timestamps, still images. Then her expression hardened. Cardenas leaned closer. "What is it?" Cortez tilted the tablet slightly so he could see. It's surveillance footage. Whitford rolled her eyes. Of the parking lot, I assume. Cortez shook her head. No. She tapped the screen. Marcus saw the frozen frame reflected faintly in the tablet's glass. A wide view of the playground. Children on the swings. Students running across the grass. Whitford leaned forward. That could be from any day. The agent beside Cortez shook his head. Timestamp is today. Marcus felt Liam shift beside him. Dad, that's our playground. Cortez nodded slowly. Yes, Whitford's voice faltered for the first time. You're saying they were recording students? We're saying they were watching patterns. Marcus spoke quietly. Arrival times. Cortez glanced at him. Exactly. Whitford looked pale now. But why? The agent beside Cortez answered. Criminal networks sometimes study predictable locations. Cardenas looked horrified. You mean they were planning something here? Cortez shook her head. Not necessarily here, Marcus finished the thought. But somewhere nearby, both agents looked at him again. Whitford stared. How would you know that? Marcus met her gaze calmly. Because observation sites are rarely the final target. The playground fell silent again. Even the wind seemed to pause. Cortez studied Marcus more closely now than ever before. Every word he said lined up with investigative logic. Professional logic. She stepped closer. Mr. Hale. He looked up. Yes, you're either very good at guessing, she paused, or you've done this kind of work before. Marcus didn't answer. But the silence itself was beginning to feel like an answer. Whitford looked between them, confused and irritated. Done what kind of work? Cortez didn't take her eyes off Marcus. The kind where noticing details like this isn't a coincidence. The agent beside her suddenly spoke again. Agent Cortez, she turned slightly. There's something else on the data drive. What? He rotated the tablet so she could see another image. Marcus noticed the moment her eyes widened, slightly. Because the camera angle had shifted. The footage now showed the maintenance corridor entrance. And one of the images captured Marcus walking past the camera earlier that afternoon. Cortez looked from the screen. Back to him. Recognition was finally breaking through. And in that instant she realized the quiet maintenance worker standing beside the boy wasn't just observant. He had once been exactly where she stood now. Recognition settled slowly across Agent Nadia Cortez's face. She looked from the tablet back to Marcus. Then again, the wind rustled across the playground, tugging lightly at the edges of the yellow police tape agents had begun placing near the white van. Liam stood quietly beside his father, unaware that the room of adults around him had just shifted into a completely different conversation. Cortez lowered the tablet. You were here earlier today, she said calmly. Marcus nodded once. Yes. Whitford leaned closer, trying to see the screen. What is it now? The agent beside Cortez tilted the tablet slightly so the others could see. The image was grainy but clear enough. A still frame captured from the surveillance camera mounted inside the van. Marcus walking past the maintenance corridor. Tool belt at his side. Head slightly lowered as he moved through the afternoon sunlight. Whitford frowned. So what? He works here. Cortez didn't respond. She zoomed in slightly on the image. Marcus noticed what she was seeing, the moment he had paused, the brief glance toward the fence line, the subtle shift in posture when he heard the van engine. Cortez looked up again. You heard the vehicle before anyone else? Yes. You checked the fence line afterward? Yes. Whitford sighed loudly. This interrogation is ridiculous, but the agent standing beside Cortez spoke quietly. He also looked directly toward the camera. Marcus felt Liam glance up at him again. Dad? He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right. Cortez studied him for another long moment. The memory was almost there now. The composure, the observational precision, the calm. She turned the tablet toward herself again, then asked quietly, "How long have you been working here? 2 years. And before that?" Marcus hesitated. Whitford threw her hands up. "Oh, for heaven's sake," but Cortez didn't break eye contact. "I've seen people notice details like you did today," she said slowly. Her voice had changed. Quieter. More certain. Usually they're trained to. Marcus exhaled slowly. Across the parking lot, another FBI vehicle pulled up near the sidewalk. 2 more agents stepped out carrying equipment cases. The investigation was expanding. Cardenas noticed the arrival too. More agents? He muttered nervously. Cortez glanced briefly toward the parking lot. Yes. Then back to Marcus. Because this case just got bigger, Whitford shook her head. "I still don't understand why this man is suddenly the center of attention," Cortez finally answered her. "Because he noticed things my team spent 3 days trying to confirm." Whitford stared. "That proves nothing," Marcus spoke calmly. "It proves the van wasn't random." The teacher scoffed again. "Oh, wonderful. Now he's leading the investigation." But Cortez ignored the sarcasm. She walked a few steps away, speaking quietly into her radio. "Cortez," a voice answered. "Go ahead, bring the recovered camera feed to the playground. I want confirmation on something." "Copy that." Marcus watched her carefully. The pattern was clear. She was verifying a theory about him. Liam tugged gently at his sleeve again. "Dad, are we going home soon?" Marcus smiled faintly. Soon, Whitford crossed her arms again. "This entire situation is humiliating for the school." Marcus glanced at her. "You humiliated my son first." Her expression hardened again. He made an accusation. He told the truth. Cortez stepped back toward them just as another agent approached with a portable monitor. "Agent Cortez," the man said. We pulled the camera footage. He placed the monitor on the hood of a nearby FBI vehicle. The screen flickered to life. Everyone stepped closer. Whitford reluctantly joined them. The footage began playing. Grainy black and white video from the surveillance camera mounted inside the van. The playground filled the screen. Children running. Students lining up for recess. The camera slowly panned across the school entrance. Then stopped. Zooming slightly. Whitford leaned closer. That could be any public camera. The agent beside the monitor shook his head. "Not public." He pointed to a timestamp. "Recorded today." The video continued. Then the moment appeared. Marcus walking past the maintenance corridor, pausing, looking toward the van. Cortez watched carefully. "Freeze it." The agent paused the frame. Marcus stood in the center of the screen, head turned slightly toward the vehicle. Whitford frowned. He probably noticed the van. Cortez spoke quietly. "No," she pointed to the image. He noticed the camera. The teacher blinked. "What?" Marcus didn't react. But Cortez's voice carried a quiet certainty now. "People don't look directly at hidden surveillance unless they recognize it." Whitford shook her head. "That's ridiculous." The agent beside Cortez spoke again. "Actually, it's not." He zoomed in further. The image sharpened slightly. Marcus's eyes were clearly directed toward the exact point where the camera had been mounted. Recognition, not curiosity. Professional awareness. Whitford looked between the screen and Marcus. "You're telling me the maintenance worker spotted a hidden camera inside a van?" Cortez nodded slowly. "Yes." Cardenas stared at Marcus now. The pieces were finally shifting for him, too. Whitford laughed nervously. "Well, maybe he just got lucky." Cortez turned back to Marcus. Her expression had completely changed now. "You didn't get lucky." He said nothing. "You knew exactly what you were looking at." Still silence. Liam looked up at his father again. "Dad, why does everyone keep asking you questions?" Marcus looked down at him, then back at the agents, and finally spoke. Because they're starting to realize something. Whitford folded her arms again. And what exactly is that? Marcus met her gaze calmly. That I used to do their job, the playground fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Cortez exhaled slowly. There it was, the missing piece, the memory finally locking into place. She looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Marcus Hale, she said quietly. Now she remembered. And the entire investigation had just taken a very different turn. If you're enjoying how this story is unfolding, make sure you're subscribed. Because the moment the truth fully comes out, everything changes. The name hung in the cool air like a door finally unlocking. Marcus Hale. Agent Cortez said it quietly, but the reaction around her was immediate. Principal Cardenas blinked. Whitford frowned. Liam looked up at his father, confused. But Marcus didn't move. The wind rustled the grass beside the playground while agents continued working around the white van, unaware that the center of attention had shifted away from their investigation. Cortez stepped closer. "I knew it," she said softly. Whitford scoffed. "Knew what?" Cortez ignored her. Her eyes remained fixed on Marcus. "You worked Intelligence Analysis Division, Domestic Threat Tracking." Cardenas looked stunned. "You're saying he's FBI?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Was?" Whitford laughed sharply. "Oh, come on." No one joined her. Cortez nodded once. 8 years, she continued. Field support and pattern analysis. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You remember the file? I remember the operation in Denver," she replied. The agent standing beside the portable monitor looked between them. "You're serious?" Cortez gestured toward Marcus. This man helped identify a trafficking network operating across 3 states. Cardenas's mouth opened slightly. Whitford's smile faded. Liam tugged his sleeve. "Dad, you were a spy?" Marcus crouched beside him. "Not exactly. Then what?" "I helped people notice dangerous things sooner." The boy thought about that. "Like the van?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Whitford still refused to accept what she was hearing. "This is absurd," she snapped. "If he was some federal investigator, why is he fixing light bulbs at an elementary school?" Marcus stood again. "Because I wanted a quiet life." The honesty of the answer surprised even Cortez. She folded her arms. "You left after the Phoenix case." Marcus didn't respond. But the silence confirmed it. The agent beside the monitor looked impressed. "That case dismantled half a financial fraud network." Whitford stared at Marcus. "You expect me to believe the janitor is some kind of hero investigator?" Marcus shrugged. "I'm not a hero." Cortez stepped beside him. "But he is the reason we caught several people who thought they were invisible." Cardenas looked at Marcus with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. You work in the boiler room. Someone has to." Whitford shook her head slowly. "So all of this, all these observations." "Training," Cortez said. Whitford looked at the tablet screen again. The image of Marcus spotting the hidden camera suddenly meant something very different. "You noticed the camera," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Yes. And the tire tracks. Yes. And the surveillance setup. Yes." Whitford looked down at the ground. For the first time since this began, she had nothing left to argue. Across the playground, another agent jogged toward them. "Agent Cortez." She turned. "What did you find?" "We finished reviewing the recovered footage." "And?" The agent handed her another tablet. "Look at the timestamps." Cortez studied the screen. Marcus leaned slightly closer. Patterns of recording times filled the display. Morning arrival. Lunch break. Afternoon dismissal. Observation windows. Exactly what he expected. Cortez nodded slowly. They were studying movement patterns. Whitford whispered, Of children? The agent shook his head. Of adults. Marcus spoke quietly. Staff. All eyes turned to him again. He pointed toward the school entrance. Teachers arrive early, then toward the parking lot. Maintenance workers stay late. Cortez followed the logic. Lower supervision windows. Marcus nodded. Predictable access. Cardenas felt the realization hit him. You're saying the school wasn't the target, correct? Whitford frowned. Then what was? Marcus looked toward the road beyond the fence. Across the street stood a small bank building. Brick walls. Security cameras. Predictable routines. He pointed toward it. That, Cortez followed his line of sight. The bank across the street. Suddenly, the entire surveillance setup made sense. Observation point. Daily routine tracking. Employee schedules. Her eyes widened slightly. They were planning a robbery. Marcus nodded. Most likely, the agent beside her checked the tablet again. That lines up with the equipment we found. Whitford looked pale now. So, my student wasn't lying. No, Marcus said quietly. He wasn't. Liam stood straighter beside him. Cardenas cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss Whitford, but she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on Marcus. You knew, she said slowly, not for certain, but you suspected. Yes, Whitford exhaled. The weight of the classroom accusation came rushing back now. The humiliation. The dismissal. She looked at Liam, then at Marcus, and for the first time, guilt replaced arrogance. Cortez folded her arms again. You should have called us sooner. Marcus smiled faintly. You arrived anyway. The agent beside her nodded. And thanks to your son, we got confirmation faster. Liam looked surprised. Really? Cortez smiled slightly. Really? Whitford swallowed hard. Because the boy she'd called a liar had just helped federal agents stop a criminal operation. Marcus rested a hand on his son's shoulder. Observation matters, Cortez nodded, and sometimes the people no one listens to. She glanced toward Whitford. Are the ones telling the truth? Across the playground, agents finished securing the surveillance equipment. The investigation had already moved forward. But the real reversal had just happened. Because now everyone at that school understood something they hadn't before. The quiet maintenance worker defending his son had once been the most experienced investigator in the entire situation. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. The wind moved slowly across the playground grass while the federal agents continued their work near the white van. Equipment cases snapped shut. Radios murmured softly. The investigation was progressing with quiet efficiency, but the real attention remained on Marcus and the small group standing near the FBI vehicle. Whitford hadn't moved. Her arms, once folded with authority, now hung stiffly at her sides. The confidence she carried in the classroom earlier had drained away, leaving something far less comfortable in its place. Principal Cardenas cleared his throat. So, the suspects were studying the bank, he said slowly, still trying to piece everything together. Agent Cortez nodded. That's the most likely scenario. She gestured toward the building across the street. The school gave them a perfect observation point. Busy enough that a parked van wouldn't stand out. Marcus added quietly and close enough to track employee routines. Cardenas looked pale. They were watching the bank staff. Yes, Cortez confirmed. Whitford finally spoke, her voice subdued. And Liam noticed them. Marcus nodded. He did. Cortez looked down at the boy with a small, approving smile. Your observation gave us confirmation we needed. Liam blinked in surprise. I just thought the van looked weird. Sometimes that's all it takes, the agent said. Behind them, one of the investigators approached again, carrying a sealed evidence bag. Agent Cortez. She turned. What else did you recover? The man held up a small device. Encrypted storage drive from the camera system. Marcus leaned slightly closer. Probably backup recordings. The agent nodded. That's what we're thinking. Whitford stared at Marcus again. You really do know what you're talking about. He shrugged slightly. Old habits. Cortez folded her arms thoughtfully. You analyzed their surveillance pattern in under 5 minutes. Marcus gave a small smile. I had help. He glanced at Liam. The boy straightened a little. Whitford looked at the child, then back at Marcus. I called him a liar. No one spoke for a moment. The quiet admission hung in the air. Cortez didn't soften the moment. You did. Whitford swallowed. I humiliated him in front of the class. Marcus remained calm. Yes, Cardenas rubbed his temples again. This is going to be difficult to explain to parents. Cortez glanced toward the school building where curious faces still pressed against the windows. It's better to explain the truth. Whitford took a slow breath. Then she turned toward Liam. Her voice was quieter now. Liam, I owe you an apology. The boy looked unsure. You do? Yes. She hesitated, clearly unused to admitting mistakes. I should have listened to you. Marcus watched silently. Whitford continued, her voice steadier now, and I shouldn't have embarrassed you. Liam looked up at his father. Marcus nodded gently. It's okay to accept apologies. The boy looked back at his teacher. Okay. Whitford exhaled softly, relief and embarrassment mixing together. Cardenas stepped forward. We'll address this properly with the school administration, he said. Marcus didn't seem concerned. I'm more interested in my son being treated fairly. That will happen, the principal promised. Cortez watched the exchange with quiet approval. Then another agent jogged toward them from the parking lot. Agent Cortez. She turned. What is it? We just finished running the suspects through the system and 2 outstanding warrants connected to financial crimes. Marcus nodded. That fits. Whitford looked at him again. How do you keep predicting everything? Marcus answered simply. Patterns, the agent continued. Local police have already been alerted. They're coordinating with us now. Cortez nodded. Good. Cardenas looked relieved. So the situation is under control? Yes, she said. Whitford looked across the playground again. The white van that had started everything now sat half dismantled as agents cataloged every piece of equipment inside it. All because a 10-year-old boy noticed something that didn't belong. The teacher shook her head slowly. I almost punished him for telling the truth. Marcus rested a hand on Liam's shoulder. That happens more often than people think. Whitford looked at him. You stayed calm the entire time. He smiled faintly. Experience. Cortez added quietly, and discipline. Cardenas looked at Marcus again with a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. I can't believe we had someone with your background working here this whole time. Marcus shrugged. Just trying to raise my son. Whitford asked softly, why didn't you tell anyone? Because I didn't need to. Cortez understood that answer immediately. Some people walked away from high-pressure careers for a reason. Sometimes peace mattered more than recognition. But today that quiet life had collided with the past. The agents finished sealing the evidence cases. Police vehicles were now arriving near the street corner across from the bank. The investigation was expanding exactly the way Marcus predicted earlier. Whitford watched the scene unfold. Then she looked at Liam again. You were right. The boy smiled slightly. Marcus squeezed his shoulder gently, and for the first time since the accusation in the classroom, the balance of power had completely shifted. The playground slowly began returning to something resembling normal. Not completely normal. Federal vehicles were still parked along the curb, and several agents continued speaking with local police officers near the white van. But the immediate tension had eased. Students were being guided back into classrooms. Teachers stood near windows whispering to one another. The extraordinary moment was already becoming a story the school would talk about for years. Marcus stood quietly beside Liam near the edge of the playground fence. The boy watched the agents carefully as they loaded the last pieces of surveillance equipment into evidence containers. "Dad," Liam said softly. "Did I really help stop something bad?" Marcus looked down at him. "Yes, but I didn't do anything special. You noticed something," Marcus replied. "That's special." The boy considered that. "Is that what you used to do?" "Mostly." Liam smiled a little. "That sounds kind of cool." Marcus chuckled quietly. Sometimes it was. Behind them, Principal Cardenas approached cautiously, adjusting his tie as he walked. "Mr. Hale," Marcus turned. "Yes?" The principal cleared his throat. "I owe both you and your son an apology." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Cardenas continued. "When Miss Whitford reported the situation earlier, I assumed the problem was a misunderstanding." Marcus nodded once. "That happens, but I should have investigated more carefully," the principal said. Marcus appreciated the honesty. Liam looked between them. "It's okay," the boy said. Cardenas smiled slightly. "You're very gracious, Liam." A moment later, Whitford approached as well. Her confidence from earlier was gone, replaced with something quieter, something far more human. She stopped a few feet away from Marcus and Liam. "I spoke with the class," she said. Marcus waited. "I explained what really happened." Liam blinked. "You did?" "Yes," Whitford took a breath. "I told them that noticing things and speaking up is important." Marcus nodded. "That's good." She hesitated. "And I told them I made a mistake." Liam shifted awkwardly. "You don't have to feel bad," Whitford smiled faintly. "Thank you." "But sometimes adults need to admit when they're wrong." Marcus respected that. Across the playground, Agent Cortez finished speaking with 2 police officers before walking back toward them. Her expression was thoughtful. "Well," she said as she approached, "your instincts were right." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "About the robbery?" "Yes." She gestured toward the bank across the street. Local police confirmed the suspects had been casing that building for several days. Cardenas looked shocked again. "So Liam helped stop a bank robbery?" "Possibly," Cortez replied. Whitford shook her head slowly. "A 10-year-old prevented a crime." Marcus corrected her gently. "A 10-year-old noticed something unusual." Liam grinned. "That's what you said earlier." Cortez folded her arms. "Your father's very good at noticing unusual things." The boy looked up proudly. "I know." The agent glanced at Marcus again. "You still are." He shrugged. "Some habits stick." She nodded thoughtfully. "You ever consider coming back?" Marcus smiled slightly. "No, not even consulting work?" He shook his head. "I like fixing boilers." Cortez laughed softly. "You're the only person I've ever met who left federal investigations for school maintenance." Marcus looked down at Liam. "I didn't leave for maintenance." The boy understood immediately. "Oh." Cortez did too. "Family," she said. "Yes." The wind shifted across the playground again, carrying the distant sound of a school bell from inside the building. Cardenas glanced toward the entrance. "I suppose classes should resume." Whitford nodded. "I'll walk Liam back." The boy looked at Marcus. "Are you coming?" "In a minute." Whitford gestured toward the building. "Let's go." Liam started walking beside her, then turned back briefly. "Bye, Agent Cortez." She smiled. "Bye, Liam, and good work today." The boy beamed before heading inside. Marcus watched until the door closed behind them. Then Cortez spoke quietly. "You raised a good kid. Trying to. He trusts you." Marcus nodded. "That matters." Cortez studied him for a moment. "You know, if he keeps noticing things like that, he might end up in my line of work someday." Marcus chuckled. "Let's hope not." she smiled. Fair enough. Police officers began escorting the last agents toward their vehicles. The investigation outside the school was wrapping up. But the ripple it created inside that building would last much longer, because every student in Liam's class now knew something important. The quiet boy who was called a liar had actually told the truth. And the maintenance worker everyone overlooked had once been the most experienced investigator on the entire scene. The final FBI vehicle pulled away from the curb just as the afternoon bell rang inside the school. Students poured out of the building in excited clusters, their voices carrying across the playground like waves. News of what had happened had already spread through the hallways. Whispers followed Liam as he walked outside beside his father. "Is that the kid?" one student asked quietly. "He's the one who saw the van," another replied. Liam glanced up at Marcus. "They're talking about me." Marcus smiled gently. Sometimes people notice things after the truth comes out. Whitford stepped outside a moment later, watching the scene unfold. The same playground where she had dismissed Liam hours earlier now carried a very different atmosphere. Respect, curiosity, and a quiet understanding that something important had happened there. She approached Marcus and Liam slowly. "The class asked a lot of questions," she said. Liam looked curious. "What kind of questions?" Whitford smiled faintly. "They wanted to know how you noticed the van," Marcus answered before the boy could. "Because he was paying attention," the teacher nodded. "That's exactly what I told them." Cardenas joined them near the walkway holding a small stack of papers. "The district office already called," he said with a sigh. "Apparently several parents saw the FBI vehicles and wanted answers." Marcus chuckled softly. "I imagine that was an interesting conversation." Cardenas gave a weary smile. "I told them the truth. A student noticed suspicious activity, and federal agents investigated it." Whitford looked at Liam again. "And that student showed more awareness than many adults." The boy shifted shyly. "I just thought something looked weird." Marcus knelt beside him again. "That's how it usually starts." Across the street, the bank employees were locking their doors for the day. Police officers still stood near the corner speaking with investigators. The ripple from Liam's observation had traveled farther than anyone expected. Cortez stepped out of her vehicle one last time before leaving. She walked toward Marcus and Liam with a relaxed smile. "Just wanted to say goodbye." Liam waved enthusiastically. "Bye." Cortez looked at Marcus. "You were right about the pattern. Local police confirmed the suspects were preparing for a robbery later this week." Marcus nodded. "Glad you caught it early." "We did," she said. Then added with a grin, "Thanks to a 10-year-old analyst." Liam laughed. "I'm not an analyst." "Maybe someday," she replied. Marcus shook his head. "Let him be a kid." Cortez raised her hands. "Fair enough." She paused for a moment before continuing. "You know, today reminded everyone here of something important." Marcus tilted his head. "What's that?" "Sometimes the person everyone ignores is the one who sees the truth first." Whitford nodded quietly. "That lesson reached my classroom today." Cardenas looked toward the school building thoughtfully. "And hopefully the entire school." Cortez stepped back toward her vehicle. "Well, take care of each other." Liam waved again. "Bye, Agent Cortez." She smiled and climbed into the SUV. Moments later, the vehicle pulled away down the street. The playground returned to its ordinary rhythm. Children laughed. Backpacks swung over shoulders. Parents waited near the sidewalk. Marcus and Liam began walking toward the parking lot. The boy kicked a pebble along the pavement as they walked. "Dad? Yeah? Were you really an FBI investigator?" Marcus smiled. "For a while. Why'd you stop?" Marcus looked at him. Because I wanted to be your dad more than anything else. Liam seemed satisfied with that answer. They reached the old pickup truck parked near the maintenance shed. Before getting in, Liam looked back at the school building. You think people will still believe me next time? Marcus opened the truck door. They will. Why? Because today they learned something. The boy climbed into the passenger seat. What? Marcus started the engine. That truth doesn't depend on who says it. The truck rolled slowly out of the parking lot, leaving the quiet school behind. But the story of that day would stay there. A reminder whispered through classrooms and hallways. The day a boy was called a liar. The day the FBI showed up. And the day everyone learned that the quietest voices are often the ones telling the truth. If you enjoyed this story, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. The waitress they mocked brought the entire courtroom to silence. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?